Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast, your go-to source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We hope you tune in often for all things people management, organizational development and change, organizational leadership, and social impact related. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. In this HCI podcast episode, I talk with Neil Chilson about the backfire effect of using control as a leader. Neil Chilson, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, John.
Yeah, it is a pleasure to be with you. I'm super excited to have a nice conversation with you today. We're going to be focusing on the backfire effect of using control as a leader. Now, there are all these different styles and approaches to leadership, and depending on the context and the situation, there might be a time and a place for more of a command control kind of an approach in leadership. But generally speaking, when we're just talking about the day-to-day running of an organization that we want to be innovative and creative and continue to push the envelope and drive value to the market, command control isn't really the best approach. So we're going to unpack that a little bit and talk about how that will backfire for you and really what we can do instead of that kind of an approach as we try to effectively lead dynamic teams and organizations. As we get started, I just wanted to share Neil's bio with everybody. Neil Chilson is the Senior Research Fellow for Technology and Innovation at Stand Together and the former Chief Technologist at the Federal Trade Commission. In his current role, he spearheads Stand Together's efforts to encourage a culture that embraces innovation as well as a regulatory environment that enables it. He holds a law degree from the George Washington University Law School and a master's degree in computer science from the University of Illinois. He received his bachelor's degree in computer science from Harding University. Chilson is a regular contributor to multiple news outlets, including the Washington Post, USA Today, Newsweek, Seattle Times, and Morning Consult. So wonderful. I could go on and on and on about your background, but is there anything else you would like to share with listeners by way of your background or personal context before we dive on in further?
Well, just really quick, the ideas that are captured in my book, Getting Out of Control, that talk about this idea of control and the backfire it can have as a leader, started when I was very young. So my interest in computer science and complexity theory, these ideas of emergent order, go way back. And I didn't really know how they applied to the policy world because I wasn't thinking about those issues at that time. I was just fascinated by the pretty pictures often that some of these computer programs could generate from very simple rules. But it's been a consistent theme throughout my work in computer science and in the policy space that complex systems are unpredictable. They're challenging to lead within, but they're also extremely powerful. And as leaders, we should think really hard about how we can operate well in those environments.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. So let's dive on in a little bit more and talk about control, and feel free to reference it in relation to your book. But what do you mean by this idea of control, and why is it often a fruitless effort when it comes to leadership within an organization where we want innovation and continual development?
Well, I think the idea of control is that when you as an individual take an action that you expect a very specific reaction from the world, whether that world be your employees, your colleagues, your customers, maybe. In the policy space as a regulatory official, it might be from the companies that you're regulating. And control is this sense that when I do something, I know what the reaction will be. And so I can send a signal to the world, and the response will be something that I created, that I caused. And so it's this causal connection. And I think often when we think about our position in hierarchies, whether it be in, especially in companies or government organizations, we often think of hierarchy as imposing control or giving us control, that we have control over the people who are lower in the hierarchy than us. But often that control is an illusion. So you referenced early on that control and command and control approaches may have some certain situations in which they're useful. And that can be true. But even in those situations, often what the control that we have is control that has sort of ceded to us by the people that we work with. They have agreed in some sense that we have control. And so even control that in those situations is often a product of an emergent process of culture that creates a culture in which somebody at the top is the one who makes all the decisions and everybody must follow those. I think the typical model might be one that we think of in the military. But there's really good examples of even in the military that type of control breaking down, surprisingly, due to the emergence of new technologies. And then I'd be happy to talk a little bit more about that as well.
Yeah, I think that's great. And the technological piece, I think, is a core component to this conversation. But I also appreciate how you highlighted kind of the illusion of control. We have this faux sense of control. We, human beings like to have a sense of order and control and feel like things are predictable. And we like to feel like if we do X, Y will happen. But we know that the world is much more complicated than that. And so we have to learn to be comfortable with complexity. We need to be comfortable with the messiness and just lean into it. Of course, we need to prepare and we need to plan strategically and we need to do all those things, but we just need to recognize that there's going to be constant pivoting, constant adjustments, and that the sense that we can control something is rather elusive and really, kind of an artifact of something that we like to pretend that we have. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, as storytelling creatures, I think we like to position ourselves in a narrative, right? And the narrative that we often say is, I did X and Y happened, I must have caused that. And in complex systems, what we know is that the results are very multi-causal. And so teasing out any one particular person's actions as causing something can be very, very difficult. But it is that's a difficult story to tell. And so the story we tell is, I sent out this command, I changed the structure of the organization, and I boosted profits by X, Y, and Z, right? So even though that was a process that involved many, many complex decisions by many, many different people, not just us. And so that illusion, while helpful as a storytelling mechanism, can actually be a barrier to adopting a realistic strategy to accomplish your goals. It can sometimes be directly counterproductive. One of the examples that I give in my book is, General McChrystal, again, back in the military, when he was dealing with Al Qaeda in Iraq. Because the technology allowed every single decision essentially by special task forces or special operators out in the field to relay information back to him, there was this sort of perceived assumption that he should weigh in on every decision that they make, every critical decision that they make. Back in the Civil War era, if you sent out a team to do something, there was no way for them to relay back information to you in that real-time way. And so that illusion of control was sort of solid, right? Like you'd be like, I told them to do something, they went out, and they did it. But what they really did was probably something quite different than you would have known as the general, at least tactically. But General McChrystal dealt with this issue where he could get the information back. So it's sort of like, he talks about it, how it like fed his ego as a leader to basically weigh in on all these really important momentary decisions. But what he quickly realized is he wasn't bringing any additional value to this decision making, right? He was basically rubber stamping the people who had the local knowledge. And while it might feed his ego and it might feel good and it might seem to be consistent with the command hierarchy of the military, it was actually slowing down the decision making in the field, and it meant that they weren't keeping up with the enemy. And so he worked hard to do the proper role of a leader, which is to instill the values and the basic rules for engaging with the enemy, and then allowing the people who were closest to the problem to make decisions without having to constantly feed back information to him, and that sped things up. So when we try to seize control too tightly as leaders, even if it's technically possible, it can often be a barrier to us achieving the goals that we actually have.
Yeah, and even if he did have something to add in terms of value to the decision making, it still has negative effects on the ability of those other individuals who are out in the field actually implementing and doing the work, right? And I imagine that's what we'll get into a little bit more as we talk about some of the backfire effects. But before we go there, I wanted to explore a little bit with you about this idea of the emergent order. I know that's something you discussed. Can you frame that up for us and explain a little bit about what examples we see historically around the emergent order?
Yeah, so emergent order is this idea that the sum is more than the total of its parts, that there is something about a system that is complex that can create more value by interactions than it can from just the individual parts. So the example I often give is, think about being at a football game. I think we had some big ones over the weekend, and the fans all at the same time, they raise these placards that say like "Go Team" or "Roll Tide" or something. That's an example of designed order. Somebody came up with that plan, the schematic, and they gave it to everybody across the whole system. Then think about the wave if you're at a sporting event. The wave, you might have some people who sort of instigate it, but every individual in the crowd who is participating is sort of following their own simple set of rules. Am I excited? Is the person next to me standing up? Do I want to stand up? Do I have food in my lap? Yeah, they're using their local knowledge to decide whether or not to do a very simple action, stand up or not. But the result is a process that is a complex pattern of coordination across many, many people. And you can see that pattern, and no one controls that pattern. Even the people who started it, they don't really control the wave. It can die out suddenly, or it can keep going for a long time, just depending on this collective sense of all the people who are participating. And so that's a good example of individuals following these very simple rules, but the result being something complex and creating something that is emergent order. And so that's what I mean by emergent order.
I'm excited to announce the publication of my new book from HCI Press, Bluer Than Indigo Leadership: The Journey of Becoming a Truly Remarkable Leader. Early in my adult life, I learned about an Asian proverb that translates as bluer than indigo. If you think about the color indigo, it is a brilliant, deep, and vibrant blue, what some would call the bluest of blues. To have something that is bluer than indigo is rare and truly remarkable. Contrary to popular myth, there is no one-size-fits-all or cookie-cutter approach to effective leadership. There's no silver bullet, no secret sauce, no go-to model that will solve all of our problems. The truth is, great leaders have all had their unique strengths and flaws, and have all had to discover and then pave their own distinctive path in their life's journey to fulfill their leadership potential. Bluer Than Indigo Leadership will help you discover your own path and explore those ordinary, everyday actions that will help you respond to an uncertain future and produce extraordinary results for individuals, teams, and organizations. Yeah, and I like what you referenced at the beginning with technologies where you can put in some simple instructions and create these really fascinating images. That again seems like something that relates to this idea of emergent order. And I think of I'm blanking on the name, the mathematical component, where the mathematical term where you can zoom in further and further and further and further.
Fractals.
What's that called?
Yeah.
Fractals. Yes.
Yeah.
Fractals.
Fractals are an example of these very simple, those very complex pictures are generated by relatively simple mathematical formulas that are repeated over and over. So where you take the output and you feed it back in as an input, and that creates these feedback loops and these structures that are similar at all levels. So you can continue to zoom in, and even at the deeper detail, they're very similar, and they're very complex. And so that's fractals was exactly what I was talking about when I said like pretty pictures as a kid, like really drew me into this stuff. I was fascinated by the idea that you could create something that had so much detail and so much nuance, but with only these very simple rules.
Yeah, and I don't claim to be an expert in chaos theory, but I remember learning early on in the early 2000s about chaos theory, and fractals were, one of the examples of that. And I just think about how this relates back to this idea of control, or this perception of control, but it's really ordered chaos, the emergent order that comes out of the chaos. Anyways, I think that's all super fascinating. So let's talk a little bit more now about instances where control can actually have a backfire effect. So you gave one example of this military general. Do you have other examples, and what could be the negative outcomes of that kind of an approach?
Well, I think we do see examples of negative examples of control, top-down control approaches. A lot of them in the business context are around a sort of ossification of the business over time, because everybody is waiting for commands from the top. They're not generating creativity themselves. One of the examples I give in the book is an example that comes from Charles Koch, one of Charles Koch's books. He developed, one of the largest private organizations, private companies in the country. And he talked about early on in his career coming into a division that was very much command and control, where so much time was spent essentially on completing reports up to management so that management could make decisions. And many of these decisions, obviously management was dealing with what Hayek calls the knowledge problem, which is the need to collect information in order to make a good centralized discussion. And Hayek calls this a problem because lots of information is dispersed among many parties. It can be tacit, sort of like riding a bike, where the person who does the task knows how to do it, but they don't know how to explain it to somebody else in a way that is operational. And it can also be not, you can't summarize it, right? So the information can be detailed enough and complex enough that any summary of it doesn't capture some of the key nuances. And so what Charles noticed was, in all of this time trying to solve the knowledge problem by reporting information up so that decisions could be made, it would have been much more productive to push decision-making down to the employees, who could then decide what do our customers need? What are they saying? How can I apply the resources that I have to solve that problem for customers? And I think that as an example of the power of decentralized decision-making, pushing decision-making down rather than trying to centralize decision-making, helps us solve this knowledge problem and helps us actually pursue the purposes of the organization in a way that's much more effective often than a command and control approach.
Yeah, I think that's a really great example. And I just think about the general development of our people. If we want to empower our people to learn to make good decisions, they're going to be more engaged and more passionate and motivated when they feel like they have more autonomy to make decisions and to implement them. And if we're constantly having to rubber stamp every decision somebody makes, the natural outcome of that for many individuals is they're just going to stop investing in the decision themselves. So many people will just kind of do the bare minimum. They'll pass it along to their boss because they just know the boss is the one who's going to make the final decision anyways. And it just doesn't even matter what they think or what they decide or what effort or time they put into it. And so we can inadvertently have this situation, this context where people don't feel psychologically safe to speak their own mind, to share their own input. And we can hamstring our own attempts to develop the next generation of leaders within our organization because nobody's developed the capacity to actually think for themselves and to actually implement. And yes, sometimes fail, but learn from those failures and then be able to move forward in a positive way. So I think there's just so many of these different types of backfire effects that can occur. Of course, not intentionally. We're not, when we oftentimes leaders step in because they want to help, because they want to guide and direct, and they want to move someone in the right direction. But we got to be really careful. If we're doing that too much, then we're really undercutting our people's ability to learn and grow through the context they find themselves in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's two key principles that I sort of caught from what you said that I've been thinking a lot about, and one of them is the need for humility as a leader, which kind of deals with that knowledge problem, right? Like there might be, I might feel like as a leader that I have a good grasp on the situation in a way that I could contribute here. That's not always the case. That's sort of the first problem. But the other one you're talking about there is the need to see our organizations and our people and our relationships with them as a process rather than just an outcome. And I think if you think about that as a leader, that my interactions on this particular project aren't just about the outcome of that project. They're also about building a process within my organization that can get better at doing projects like that in the future. And that means helping build the capital, the experience in the people that work with us, so that they can improve their skills. It's not just about solving this problem. It's about fulfilling the big picture objectives of the organization. And that can mean it might be more efficient in some ways for me to step in as the experienced leader, but that shortcuts this process, which should be our real goal as leaders of creating an organization that can solve problems without needing us to jump in every single time.
Yeah, it's a long-term sustainability approach to the growth and development of the organization, which requires a sustainability approach to developing the people within that organization. And so, if I feel like I need to step in because there is a major decision that has to be made, or because failure really isn't an option in this particular situation, fine, that's fine. And there are situations where leaders absolutely need to do that. But as a general rule, on the day-to-day, do we need to get into all the nitty-gritty details of every last thing that our people are doing? No. And in fact, we often aren't even well suited to do so, because when we get promoted into levels of leadership, oftentimes we had a certain level of technical expertise in our area, but very quickly that becomes obsolete, or can become obsolete. And so it's the members of our team that have the technical knowledge and the skills to be able to actually carry out the work. And we can really short circuit really good, productive people by trying to insert ourselves, thinking that we might be helping when really, we don't even actually know what we're talking about. And we're undermining them in the other ways we've already mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, wonderful. This has just been a fascinating conversation, and we could go on and on and on, but I note the time and I need to let you go here in a few minutes. So before we close, I just wanted to give you a chance to share with listeners how they can get connected with you, how they can find out more about your work, your book, and then give us the final word on the topic for today.
Yeah, sure. So, the book is called Getting Out of Control, Emergent Leadership in a Complex World. You can get it on basically any platform that you can get books. I have a Substack where I share some of the ideas, and I'm trying to build a community around these ideas of emergent leadership in a complex world. That's outofcontrol.substack.com. And you can follow me on Twitter at Neil_Chilson. The key thing I'm trying to give readers with this book is a gut level understanding of the power of emergent order, examples of it across society, including in corporate governance and in government. And some tips. I have 6 principles for emergent leadership in the book that will help you apply that idea to your daily life, whether it's in the public sphere, whether it's as a leader in a organization, or even in your own personal life with habit building. So thanks so much for having me on, John. I've really appreciated it, and I hope your audience will engage with these ideas and get something out of them.
Wonderful. Thank you, Neil. It has been a real pleasure. I encourage listeners to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Neil can do for you. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. The alchemy of truly remarkable leadership. Ordinary, everyday actions that produce extraordinary results. Consider how the nature of work has shifted over the past 50 years. With increased globalization, rapid technological advancement, and the shift in economic composition, the average job of today looks very different than the average job of 50 years ago. What will the jobs and organizations of tomorrow look like? Moreover, what does this all mean for organizational leaders? What are the core competencies and capabilities of organizations and their leadership that are prepared for continued disruption and geopolitical and socioeconomic shifts? Regardless of what the future holds, increasingly, leaders need to be socially minded, data-driven, decisive, champions of talent, and disruptors of the traditional notions of leadership, teams, organizations, and work. The alchemy of truly remarkable leadership will help you to explore your own leadership competencies and capabilities and consider ways to apply and implement them into your workplace and personal life. Check out Human Capital Innovations magazine, Human Capital Leadership. Human Capital Leadership is a free, interactive e-magazine with the mission to help individuals, leaders, and organizations find innovative approaches to maximize their human capital potential. We publish issues quarterly in August, November, February, and May. Take a look at the latest issue and let us know what you think. Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe and that you have a great week.